All right, so some details, some technicalities, some things. If you work, you're full time or part time, it doesn't matter. So, in the employment statistics, all it takes is 1 hour to be employed. So, there's no difference in the statistics between full time and part time. During the Great Depression, maybe a quarter of the workforce shifted from full time to part time. It didn't have any effect on the unemployment rate because they were still employed. Okay? We have this thing called discouraged workers, not disgruntled workers. I work at UNLV. I'm a disgruntled worker. Discouraged workers are people who want a job, but they've given up looking. So you work every day. Every day you're out looking for a job. You don't have a job, and every day for 2 years, Christmas even, you're out looking for a job. Can't find one. One morning you wake up and say, screw it, I'm not doing that anymore. Your partner can turn over to you, slap you on the back, and go, honey, it's beautiful. You're not unemployed anymore. So you have to be actively seeking, right? You got to be, and there's probably, the government claims there's between 1 million and 2 million discouraged workers in the United States right now. That's probably a gross understatement. There are 6 unemployment rates. People hear, oh, unemployment, but there's really six, count them, 6 unemployment rates. The one we talk about the most is called U3, which is the percent of the labor force that is unemployed. Some of the U's include discouraged workers, some don't. Some take people out who've been unemployed a short period of time. Blah 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 blah. But we're only going to worry about U3 from our point of view. Okay, so data. How about some data? The U.S. population estimate right now is currently 334,900,000 people. That makes us the third most populous country on Earth after India and China, and there's a dispute actually about which country is bigger, India or China, population-wise. We're not even close. We're a third the size at best of either one of those two countries, but we're the third most populated country in the world. The civilian non-institutional population is 272 million. That means kids and institutionalized and all that folks and the military are about 60 million people, 62 million people. There's 170 million in the labor force, of which 163 million have jobs and 7 million are unemployed. That leaves us with 101 people not in the labor force. If something really bad happened and we needed a whole bunch of more workers, theoretically they're out there, right? There's a whole bunch of people who could be in the labor force, who could be working, but aren't for whatever reason. So we can calculate some numbers. First, the labor force participation rate. You kind of have to go, the force be with you. So, labor force participation rate is the labor force divided by the non-institutional population is 170 million over 272 million is 60.1%. That means of the available people who are technically considered able to be employed by the government, only 60% of them are in the labor force. This number peaked at 67% in 2000, has been going down ever since. Tells you something about the economy that for 24 years, 25 years, we've been seeing a decline in participation. So the U3 unemployment is the number of unemployed divided by the labor force. That 6849 is right now 4%. In April of 2020, that was 14.7% during the worst of the pandemic. Goes up and down, and we'll talk about that. We've already talked about that some, and we'll talk about that more as life goes on. Here's the historic unemployment rate going back to the end of World War II, basically. Not quite that far, but almost, a couple years shy. And you can see that unemployment goes up and down and up and down and up and down. The bars on here, the dark color bars, are where we have recession. So we had 2 recessions when Eisenhower was president. You can see unemployment goes up. We had one Um, After that, we didn't have one until Richard Nixon was president, and you can see that bar go up. We had one in 75 when Gerald Ford was president, then one in 1980 for Jimmy Carter, one after that for Reagan, which is a big one. Some people count that as two separate recessions, and we kind of already talked about that. Then unemployment goes down. We get a little boopy recession when George H.W. Bush is president. Then unemployment drops significantly during the Clinton years. Pops up again. There's a first Bush recession. It pops up. It goes down a little bit. And then the second big Bush recession that starts when Bush was president, and then Obama comes in and ends it. And then you can see that most of Obama's time, we get significant decrease in unemployment. It jumps up, and of course Trump just stayed on the line that Obama was already on. Pops up during the recession, comes back down to where it was, and it's gone up a little bit since then. But remember, it hasn't gone up because people are losing their jobs. It's gone up because during the pandemic, people dropped out of the labor force. It wasn't just that people said, hey, I can't find a job. People dropped out of the labor force, particularly women who stayed home and taught their kids when their kids weren't allowed to be in school. So part of what has happened now is that the economy is actually good. There's lots of jobs out there. And so as people say, hey, I can find a job now, people come back into the labor force. So as we get people moving back into the labor force, even though other people are finding jobs, if more people come back into the labor force, if 200,000 people move back into the labor force in a month and 150,000 people find jobs, the unemployment rate's going to go up, even though there's more jobs and more people with jobs. So it's a complicated thing, this unemployment rate. Okay, this is weekly earnings. This is adjusted for inflation. How much, and we'll talk about inflation in a minute, but what does the person who works by the hour? So this is average take-home pay for a week of people who work by the hour. And you can see that it fell. There's an initial downward decline, right, which is around 1980. That's Carter into Reagan. It stays kind of low during Reagan. Toward the end of Reagan, it goes up a little bit. Then it falls during Bush being president. The first half of Clinton's time as president, it's flat, and then it pops up. In the last few years of Clinton being president, wages pop way up. Then Bush is president, and they stay flat during Bush's time in office, and then they start going up again when Obama's president, continue to go up. Now, somebody says, hey, when I was president, there was a huge upward increase in wages. Well, yeah, why? Who got laid off during that big pandemic thing was restaurant workers, hotel workers, service people who get paid low wages. So for the people who are left working, they're paid high wages. College professors didn't get laid off. We get, we're not paid by the hour, but you see the point. There's a statistical fluke here. Wages were going up, not any faster than they'd been going up before, but then they take this bump when all these people get laid off. So the low-paid people get laid off, the high-paid people keep their jobs. That creates an artificial bump in the stats, and when the pandemic is over, it comes back down because, hey, we put the maids back to work in the hotels, we put the servers back to work in the restaurants, blah, blah, blah. And then since the last 3 years of Biden, wages have started going back up. So this is how fast jobs grew under each president. And again, the two highest bars are Roosevelt and Biden. They both came in during really bad economic times. And so when the economy has crashed, they're of course going to get a significant bump coming back up. So let's just ignore those two. Ignore Biden, ignore Roosevelt. Who has the fastest growth? The blue lines, remember, the blue lines are Democrats, the red lines are Republicans. So Truman, Kennedy, Johnson, Carter, Clinton, those guys all had pretty fast growth in employment. Those are the 5 fastest employment growths. The Republicans are not very good at it. Nixon, Reagan, okay at it annually. Trump, if we didn't have the pandemic, Trump is down. That there's only 2 presidents who have left office with fewer jobs in the country than when they started. One of them is Herbert Hoover at the Great Depression. The other is Donald Trump. That bar, if we just look at his first 3 years before the pandemic, his bar and Obama's bar are about the same. So job growth under Trump his first 3 years was a little better than either Bush, but not as good as for Nixon or Reagan. Okay? So here's black unemployment, and again, we've been hearing from presidents lately that the last 2 of them go, hey, we have the lowest black unemployment ever. Well, here's the truth. The government didn't start measuring whether black folks were employed or unemployed until 1971. So when was the best black unemployment ever? We don't know. The government ignored black unemployment up until the 70s. And so during both Trump's time and Biden's time, we had record low black unemployment in the statistics. You can see that both during Obama's time and during Trump's time, up until the pandemic, black unemployment went down pretty significantly. But we would guess that the best time for black unemployment probably was the 40s. And that's because during World War II, the military did not take black folks in general. Right? There were segregated units. So there were black units and Asian units. The Navy only let black folks be cooks and laborers, stewards, work in the kitchen. The Army had limited numbers of spots for black folks to be in certain units. There was only one black. The Tuskegee Airmen was the only black Air Force unit. So literally millions of black folks who were in the South moved to the North during the World War II and took over jobs that had been held previously by white folks. So World War II, actually discrimination during World War II in some ways actually worked really well for large groups of black Americans because there were really good jobs for them, which then they were tossed out of in large part after the war. Anyway, the trick here is we didn't care about black folks. We didn't separate their numbers out. And black unemployment's all along that graph, black unemployment is significantly higher than white unemployment. So does college matter? Yes, it does. No matter who tells you that college doesn't matter, the unemployment rate right now for people who didn't graduate from high school is 5.2. For high school grads, 4.5. Some college, 3.5. BA or better, 2.3. And you're saying, well, that's not much of a difference. Hold on there. So A, you're half as likely to be unemployed if you graduate from college as if you don't graduate from high school. But B, during the Great Recession, 2008, 9, 10, the huge recession, the non-high school, the less than high school unemployment hit 15%. The BA or better unemployment stuck around 4. We haven't had college graduates with more than 5% unemployment in the United States since the Great Depression. Okay? College folks who don't have jobs, some of them, if you're a history major or philosophy major or something silly like that, you might have trouble finding a good job, but Starbucks would rather hire you than somebody who dropped out of high school because you showed that you're reasonably smart, you can do the blah, 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 blah. So graduating from college significantly lowers your chance of being unemployed in your life. And on average, you make about $1 million more during your life, but it depends on your major again. So econ majors are going to make $3.5 million on average more than someone who just has a high school diploma. So depending on your major, it's really, really worth it. So here's the unemployment rate by race right now. White 3.5, black 6.2, Asian 3.7, Hispanic Latino 4.8. So again, Why don't we like unemployment? Well, unemployment has all kinds of tribbles with it. The first is social costs. When unemployment goes up, divorces go up, child abuse goes up, spousal abuse goes up, crime goes up. All these horrible things, suicide rates go up. People don't like being out of work, and particularly if you have a household to support, you're the breadwinner of your household, and you all of a sudden are unemployed, that puts huge pressure on you as an individual. And so we have increased government spending. We have all kinds of programs to help people who are unemployed, to make sure that they have income and housing. We also end up having to do a lot of social services and more police and more because of the other things that go on. But the counter to that is they're not working. They don't have income, so they don't pay income tax. So during times of high unemployment, government spending goes up, but tax collections go down, and that is not a good thing. We also know that voters care more about the economy than everything else, and they care more about unemployment normally than they do about inflation. Okay? This election was decided because people had a bad feeling of what the economy is like, plus they'd just been through this inflation, and when that happens, they change sides. So there's a horrible economic crash, 2008, 9, 10. What do? We switch parties. The Republicans were in office when that recession happens. We put Obama in. The last 6 of the last 7 recessions have happened with Republicans in the White House, and except for this, well, even after this last one, right? When there's a recession, we always change parties. So we went Trump to Biden, we went Bush to Obama, right? We switch political parties. When there's a recession, we went H.W. Bush to Clinton. And you say, well, then why'd we switch from Clinton to Bush? Well, the answer is we all know, and you should take my economics in the Constitution course. Al Gore won the election in 2000. Everybody knows it. There is a closet somewhere in Florida that has the records. It has boxes of uncounted votes. George Bush wins Florida by 400 votes. There are something like 7,000 or 8,000 votes that are left to be counted in Florida that were never counted, and they're all from a county which is 60, 70, 80% Democrat. So nobody on the planet believes that George Bush won the election. Al Gore won the election. But the Supreme Court stopped the voting before it could finish. The Supreme Court said, you're not going to get this done in time, Florida, and we're not sure you've done it right. 5-4, the 5 Republicans on the Supreme Court said, we're going to stop the voting count. The 4 Democrats said we should keep counting. So, that's not really a break in the pattern. That's just a weird election. Okay?